Hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar where we'll be discussing 5 essential considerations for operating model transformation in the age of AI in collaboration with Chasey Partners. To quickly introduce myself, my name's Beth. I'm a conference producer and editor here at SSON, and I'll be moderating the webinar today. And for those of you joining us for the first time, or perhaps you just want a little refresher, I'm going to quickly remind you how to use the console you see in front of you. So you can maximize the view of your slides and the media player if you'd like to see anything closer or a little bit clearer. There's an attendee chat, which you should see on the bottom left of your screen, where you can pose questions to our speakers, and we always encourage that you do so, as we have time reserved at the end of the session for an audience Q&A. Next, as it's not easy presenting, especially when it's online and you can't see the audience's reactions, we've included an emoji tab at the bottom of your screens where you can send a smiley face or a thumbs up if you are enjoying the session or agree with one of our speakers' points. So please do so. It's always nice to see how you guys are finding the session. Next, there's a question mark where you can see answers to common FAQs. But if you have any other technical issues, you can message in the attendee chat, and either myself or the SSON team will do our very best to help you out. Next, there's a head and shoulders icon where you can learn more about our speakers and connect with them on LinkedIn. And finally, we have our resources tab on the bottom right of the screen with some great additional resources from Chasey, such as the recent report with SSON on the transformation in age of AI. We have today's PowerPoint slides. And finally, we have a link to the next webinar in Chasey's webinar series on the future of business and adapting and thriving in the digital world. Before I pass over to our session today, I'm just going to quickly introduce our lovely speakers, starting with Phil Searle. And Phil is the founder and CEO of Chasey Partners. He has more than 30 years of experience in operating model transformation and technology, including global business services and the very latest in intelligent automation. Prior to Chasey Partners, Phil held a number of operational roles, including CFO at Cendant TDS International and Chief Accounting Officer at 3Com Corporation. Phil is also a widely published writer and a regular speaker and presenter at events around the globe, including multiple SSON events. Next, we have Lee Coulter, and Lee brings an unparalleled wealth of experience and industry wisdom to the Chasey team, with roles such as CEO of Shared Services at Ascension and CAO at Kraft Foods. He has led GBS, ERP, and operating model transformation initiatives and chaired events that have shaped the transformation business services industry. Lee has been a pioneer in intelligent automation and artificial intelligence for over a decade as a practitioner and provider. He founded and led the IEEE Working Group on Standards in Intelligent Process Automation as chair for 5 years, and actually spent 4 years as SSON's Chief Intelligent Automation Officer. He founded and grew 2 IA businesses, Agility Automation and Transform AI. So with that being said, welcome Phil and Lee, and thank you so much for being here. Looking forward to the session.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Thank you very, very much, Beth. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. Good evening, everyone, wherever you are. I'm actually based on the west coast of the US. My colleague Lee is in the central time zone. So welcome to this session. It's as Beth said, we're going to be focusing on 2 main areas today, operating model and AI. My colleague Lee will be leading most of the session. And as you heard with his introduction there, he has oodles of experience in this space. So he will be driving most of the conversation. I will be adding context and we're having some discussion. As Beth said, please send us your questions. We'll try and catch them at the end. If we don't, we're very happy to follow up on all your questions. We have Chetna from Chasey on the line, and she'll be clocking those, and we can send them back to you. And as Beth also mentioned, we have all the content we'll be sharing, including the slides. So don't worry too much about taking pictures of the slides or anything as we go through. So in terms of who we are, I mean, I've just very, very briefly, Chasey Partners founded, as he said on the slide earlier, 2006. So coming up for 18, 19 years. We're part of the QX Global Group for the last 2.5 years. But you can see here in our space, we operate in the mid to large enterprise businesses. And I've been personally in operating models, shared services, global business services, and technology for a long, long time, 35 years. And I've been through the various trends from the old school slow ERP and other technology enablers and document management and workflows and things like that through to, in the last sort of 10 years or so plus, intelligent automation and RPA. And the very latest extension of that is AI, artificial intelligence. And that's the focus of today in terms of how that's disrupting things. And all technology disrupts, but this one really is disrupting, not that they haven't in the past. And we're going to be touching a lot on how and why. And we're going to be touching on some of the similarities with past technologies, but why it's also different. This is different, the same but different. And that's going to be a key focus of today, linking to operating model. So you can see on here as our clients, and we have a mixture of operating model and technology clients. One thing that Lee will say, and we do this with all our clients too, is every single engagement now discusses intelligent automation and AI, not necessarily for today, but as part of your roadmap plan. So it's a hugely exciting subject. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Lee, who will add a few more opening remarks and then get us going. Lee, thanks very much.
Wonderful, thanks, Phil. And just to add a little clarity, the operating model world and the technology world and the process model world have kind of come together in the last, I would say, 10 years. And so today we're really going to be highlighting what are we talking about with transformation? How do we break that apart? What are we talking about with an operating model? How do we break that apart? What does it mean to be AI capable or AI ready? And then finally, what does that mean when you establish design criteria for your operating model in a transformation? And then we'll be unpacking those in terms of the 5 key buckets, really with a focus on the operating model perspective here. So a couple of things to set us off. Today, business and technology are changing the slowest that they ever will. That is hard to grapple with. And it may be hard to see because we kind of get blinded by the things that are immediately in front of us, but AI is affecting every single aspect of business. And we're talking multiple orders of magnitude, hundreds or thousands of times better, faster, cheaper, more accurate. Instead of being really great at customer service, we disintermediate the need for service altogether. Truly groundbreaking and changing ways of business. And I'm sure that somewhere you have all heard some AI evangelist say, if you don't jump in with AI now, it's going to be too late. And I don't really want to be one of those guys, but what we're going to share with you today is a way to slide in rather than jump in, because jump in requires a lot of things. So we're going to kind of look at the jump in and the slide in. So why are we talking to GBS today? Well, interestingly, Phil and I both come from that world. And what we know is that GBS is often the home of process people, technology people, change management people, operating model people. GBS is the place where the business goes to find savvy people to drive changes. The first call when there's an acquisition after the acquisition closes is GBS. Can you help us integrate this? First call when there's a new CFO or a new CHRO. Hey, we're going to implement a new operating model for the function. This is standard, and GBS has skills and experience in structured governance and programmatic multi-year rollouts of significant change initiatives. And there's really no place else in the business that has that. And I think that that's important. It's also a place for GBS to open the door for these conversations because they're pretty important. So nothing has changed in that respect. GBS has been leading the way, even though we don't get a ton of credit for it, and now is no different than that. So let's kind of start with what is transformation. And I'm not going to drain the slides. Phil and I are here to offer commentary. So transformation is really different than incremental improvement or optimization. And I think we want to drive that point home. We're not going to get an AI capable enterprise or function with optimization of an existing operating model. It's too fundamentally different. And when we see here dramatic change in form, function, and appearance, that this meets that threshold. So the operating model, obviously, how things are structured, how work gets done, and what kind of technology. So we have 2 more webinars coming up. Just want to be sure to plug those as we take a focus on the technology component of that, the digital transformation part of that, and then finally the process part of that. So today we're going to be focused really on an aspect that is focused on the operating model components. So an operating model, I'm going to start. Yeah, go ahead.
The only thing I'd add in there, Lee, is you touched on it. I just wanted to make a comment. And the difference between optimization and transformation is fundamental in any operating model. Optimization is really changing or updating your existing operating model. Transformation is changing the operating model. And I think the point here about AI, and we discussed this yesterday, you and I, didn't we, Lee, that really with AI, with previous technologies like RPA, you could actually implement them in situ within a function, within a team. With AI, you really need to, while you may still be able to do that in the function, you really need to think about it at the enterprise level. And that's the transformational change here. So I just wanted to add that.
I think it's a great point, Phil. And we're going to come back to that point at least 5 times as we go through this content. Yes. Because in each one of these, there are components of it that are clearly non-incremental or non-optimized based stuff. They are fundamentally new things that need to be learned, embraced, brought into the enterprise. And whether you're doing it at a function level or at an enterprise level, it's some non-trivial stuff. So I don't know how many of our audience actually have a declared operating model. I think it's more common today than it was 20 years ago, but still many, I might even say most businesses don't operate with a declared operating model. So we could say that there's a default operating model. And it's really built on these 5 components. What is the business structure? Are you oriented along geographic lines, product lines, service lines, what P&L lines? How is the business structured? Obviously, you're structured around work processes. Then you actually have the workforce that's doing the work. It's both human and digital workforce. And surprisingly or not, technology drives a significant part of your operating model. If you look inherently under SAP or Oracle or Salesforce, it drives a particular operating model because of the nature of the way the business that technology.
And actually, the challenge when you're implementing these technologies is you don't realize that, and they operate in parallel. That's a key point as well.
I think it's a great point, Phil. And in fact, maybe one that we should highlight here is that we kind of inadvertently adopt a piece of software and then realize that we have to organize differently in order to use the software properly. Well, that could never be more true with AI. When we adopt AI, we're going to find that we have to adapt the operating model to account for AI. So whether it's your first AI project or your 100th AI project, it's going to drive operating model changes. So we're kind of coming at this from the tops down. I think the earliest adopters are kind of coming at it from the bottom up. And then priorities, I think, are another important one here. We're going to really hit that hard because we're talking about, and I hate to be like, dystopian, but there's a disruption component that is absolutely real, and there are numbers to prove it. So this is the, when we're talking about an operating model, this is what we mean. And then when we talk about what is AI ready, well, this is what we mean. And so we unpack this a little bit and I'm going to ask Phil to come back and talk a little bit about governance. So obviously we need a case for change. In this case, it needs to be, and we're going to unpack what we mean when we say leadership buy-in. And it's a sustained buy-in, which is very different than like your CFO supporting, a new piece of technology for a year and a half. And then obviously governance, we're going to unpack that a lot because it's a big deal. Innovation, when we say innovation, we're now going to add some aspects to it that talk about AI specifically, and then talent and future proofing. And in every industry sector, in the next 5 years, 10 years max, AI capability will really define who is the leader in every industry sector. And Phil, you and I were having a conversation about governance and how ready organizations are to actually govern.
Yeah, I mean, I know we've got a little bit more on governance coming up later in the session, but I mean, governance is I mean, every transformation I've been involved with, people talk about rightly governance, and yet the implementation of a governance framework is often fairly loose. fairly inconsistent, maybe not enforced. I think with AI, the principles of governance are absolutely in place, but the importance of them, I think, are accentuated because the dangers of AI, the opportunities and dangers are both significant. The speed, the ability to transform and improve, but also the ability to do damage. And we'll talk about that later. So the governance frameworks that are often talked about are even more fundamental with AI and need to be tighter and more robust, but don't let it stop you moving ahead. And we'll be talking about that. But so that's what I would say about governance at this point.
Great points, Phil. So when we sit down, like Chazy and Phil and I individually have done lots of operating model transformations. When we sit down with that, first thing you do is you list out what are my design criteria? What am I designing to satisfy in the new operating model, the to-be operating model? And you can see, again, I'm not going to drain the slide, but these are typical elements that get listed on the what are we solving for list. And now we're adding this bottom one. Now do all of that and ensure every part of the company is capable of adopting AI forever or risk extinction. No big deal, right? No big deal. So now let's take a look at the OpModel design criteria after we add AI. And we are going to unpack this a little bit, and then we'll jump into really unpacking things. So leaders that understand what's possible today and next year, when you look at your C-suite and the next level or two levels, you can draw your own conclusions on your level of AI leadership. AI governance, Phil talked about that just a minute ago. We're going to unpack that more deeply. We're going to unpack each of these five. Innovation, where does AI play? Not just today, but tomorrow. And how do we adopt it? That's solutions engineering. It's a whole bunch of things that honestly are completely and fundamentally different when we're using predictive technologies or AI technologies more broadly as a family. Gen AI obviously being one, but AI is all over the enterprise. So we're not by any means narrowing this just to AI, to Gen AI. AI talent, this has been in the news for, I don't know, at least 5 years. Try to go find some good AI talent. So we're going to unpack on some things to do about that. And of course, future-proofing. So every operating model has as a set of design criteria to attempt to have designed in agility and flexibility necessary to react to the very things that we were talking about. So meeting the new market dynamics. So we try to build some of that in. If we know that there's specific business objectives coming up, we'll try to build in the flexibility into our operating model to account for those things. So future-proofing is an essential ingredient for doing this, such that your operating model has more staying power than 3 to 5 years.
The only thing I would add to this slide briefly is that one of the, and again, you and I were chatting about this yesterday, Lee, is one of the important things is actually to understand what AI actually means, right, as a technology, and then the definition, because AI is thrown all around today, and you've got all sorts of different types of AI. You've got maybe what you call narrow AI, you've got machine learning, you've got natural language processing, you've got computer vision, you've got reinforced learning, you've got generative AI, and they are different. Each one of those are different. So they're all in the same bucket, but you need to be careful about which one you're applying to, and actually governance links to that as well, because generative AI, for example, talks about new content, new data, something brand new, recreation, and therefore it's actually there's more opportunity and also more danger. So anyway, definition is clearly very important as you think about that operating model and governance.
We can't stress this enough, folks. Like whether you're talking about adversarial networks, deep learning, unsupervised learning, traditional machine learning, there are 240 or so algorithms that are commonly called AI. These things were created back in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. This is not new math, but it's new technology because we now have the ability to run these algorithms against large data sets and actually create things. And Gen AI is particularly of interest because for the first time ever, technology is actually creating something novel. This is a never before in the world sort of dynamic here. There's a lot of new stuff here, and it means you're probably going to need some help as you go down this path. So let's take a little glance at the OpModel design elements. So when we sit down and have a conversation with an organization who is going to be going through an OpModel transformation, we say, hey, we highly recommend that you include these AI design criteria in your operating model transformation work. And they're like, well, what unpack that for me? What's in that? So this slide, and I want to make an emphasis on the first point here, which is AI actually has its own operating model. It's called AI Ops. And if you're not familiar with that, that's a separate webinar. Happy to do that if there's sufficient interest, or we can issue a paper on it. But AI Ops is a whole operating model to do AI at scale. But when we're looking at the operating model, here we see trust, ethics, and governance again. Obviously, organization, the technology build versus buy, data strategy. We're going to hit data strategy again because few people really understand what's going on within their data and what's valuable and what's not, how to clean it, how to use it. These are important components. And then even within AI delivery, so you might build an AI model, let's say for predictive analytics for complex work routing. That model needs to be trained, and then it needs to be monitored for wander. To see if its performance begins to degrade, because sometimes AI just does that. It just decides to start behaving differently. This is a whole new dynamic. We don't have a history of watching technology to see if it changes itself. Well, now we're going to have to. So delivery and the operating model for re-engineering and the business operations underneath that are non-trivial. And particularly, and we're going to keep hammering this home, being capable of delivering AI solutions at scale. That means every one of the 9 functions at your company is got a roadmap that carries out for 2 to 5 years on AI. So, Phil, you want to talk a little bit about, you and I talked about this, well, we've been talking about this for a better part of a year, in terms of leadership and our challenges with when we add AI for leadership.
Yeah, I mean, just quickly, I mean, leadership obviously is fundamental to any transformation, but leadership has all sorts of components to it. And I think with AI, you really need leaders who understand or are willing to understand and learn about the change. 2, are committed to it. 3, don't just give it lip service approval, but actually physically really support it. And 4, I could go on, there's a long list, but 4, understand the impact of the change this is going to have on the organization, roles and responsibilities. It's fundamental. And if you're afraid of that change as a leader, you're not a leader. So I know we talked a lot about this. So in every change, there are some leaders who are going to step up to the plate and really drive, and others who are going to be threatened by that. I just think, again, linking back to what we said at the start, AI is going to expose and or move more quickly all the impacts of technology than we've ever seen before. And so leadership needs to come along with that. And leadership's at all levels, by the way. We're not just talking about C-suite. We're talking about some of the newest and youngest people in the organization can be great leaders in this space as they drive through. So that's what I would say as well.
Yeah, I think what another important point I would drive home here is that leadership needs to be comfortable with something it's never been comfortable with before, which is fast failure and public celebration of failure. This is a case where this is just all new for leadership, to actually be in a position to say, hey, we're going to be actually doing things and we're going to fail quite a lot, and we're going to celebrate those things. This is completely new. And that's even assuming that we have leadership that really understands what the future holds and is capable of fostering a culture of innovation. So we put together some challenges and solutions, because we hear when we talk to people about these, well, we don't have the right leaders. The board doesn't understand. There's so much going on around this place, and they just don't feel the urgency. So we put together 12 strategies here, or strong recommendations. And we highlighted a couple with some underlining here to really say, these are highly recommended. Phil just talked about leadership and assessing whether or not your leaders are capable of leading into the era of AI. So assess them and put them on development plans. This is not like great leaders need to be jettisoned, but they do need to be developed. Obviously, the talent pool is very, very tight. It's hard to hire great talent and hold on to it, but guess what? You can do that. And a lot of folks are looking at their young leaders who are digital natives and giving them fast path careers into these leadership spots. The board, Phil, we were talking about this yesterday as well. The board is often the slowest part, right? They're a change resistor, kind of by design. So what do we do with the board?
Just on that point, I think you mentioned earlier on that there is a threat to business models. It's going to be more rapid. So, I mean, we can talk a lot about companies that have gone out of business because they've been superseded by technology, or not just technology, but operating model change. Well, that's going to happen quicker and more dramatic. So on the board level, I think it's really important that boards do get educated very, very quickly, and they link that to the executive suite, which gets linked to the strategy. And I think that's the important thing. Yeah.
Yeah. I can't, we did actually underline it, but to drive that point home, your board has to get smarter really, really fast. A lot of change, super tough. I know what I'm asking here, but it's really, really essential. You got to stop doing some things. There are things that when you stand back and look are not existential. They feel important, but I'm sure you've heard, don't let the urgent become the enemy of the important. There's a lot of urgent stuff going around the enterprise. Okay, we stop that and focus on the important. And there really are few things as important as this. And when we talk about don't feel the urgency.
One of my personal favorites, just quickly, because you let me say this now, because it's give me a route in. The art of prioritization is to decide what's not a priority more than it is to decide what is a priority, and that's just huge.
Yes. Yes. This is, I have literally sat in executive team sessions, at the end of 4 days on a strategy workshop. And we have 42 priorities. And I pound my fists on the table and I say, that means we have no priorities. If I can't explain them in 30 seconds to a stranger in an elevator, then we really do not have keen priorities. And I think your point is absolutely wonderful, Phil. So most businesses have an enterprise risk matrix team that reports to the board, usually to the audit committee of the board, and involve those folks. And the reason for that is they're going to literally have data that says this is an existential threat. So this can be helpful to move the board. This can be helpful to move the executive team. It can just really, really be helpful. So talent and culture. The war for AI talent is legendary, and we're not even in the real big thick of it yet. And so we want to highlight a couple things on this slide. One is that we have an approach to it, but the second part is that there's some really different stuff here. Did you ever really anticipate that you would have AI research going on in your enterprise? Well, if you're AI capable, you're going to have that. Now you may we'll talk about how you solve for that. Obviously, AI engineers, there's so many new jobs. Prompt engineering, model trainer, drift manager, bias controller. Like these are jobs that you've just never heard of before. And there are new ones being created as enterprises are doing this very work. And obviously there are traditional IT skills that and business skills that when you layer on AI on top of them, they become demonstrably different. And we'll talk about a data wrangler. How many of you have data wranglers in your enterprise today? So talent is a really big one. There's lots to unpack there. You don't have to start, with 100% solution, but here again, we we really tried to say, okay, well, when we talk to folks, what do we hear? Well, we tried to hire some people. All right. Well, we don't have the time. We don't know how to develop it internally. Management doesn't know what good looks like. Our brand isn't attractive for people to come and do AI. Okay, understand. Those are genuine challenges. And my first point there is try harder, do more. And I say that because this is not a case where the faint of heart can just fade away and say, oh, well, we tried, must not be that important because we couldn't get it done. This is where, having the board and the management team on board, understanding the existential threat that really truly exists, it will matter. So we highlighted a few here, and I'm just going to touch on those, let you read the rest of the slide. Create a separate company or division. It's a very common strategy. Give it a new brand, hire different people, give it a different charter, and have it exist here, and have it then develop and influence things across the core enterprise. How many of you are regularly hiring people from the gig economy? Some of the best talent on earth refuses to be a W-2 employee. So go really get involved and understand there are 5, 10 massive gig economy websites for IT. And there's an unbelievable talent out there. You're going to have to rent some people to help you. There's just no way around this. I've never met a single company that was like, yep, we've got everything we need. We're going to know exactly what we're going to do, and we're going to go do it. And brand is important, but there's if we go back to acquire it or create a separate company or division, then you can kind of solve the brand piece. But the fact that these challenges exist should not be stopping you. So Phil, let's talk a little bit about governance. And there's a lot of stuff on this slide. We'll let folks read the slide, but what would be your big takeaways for AI governance?
So we should also finish the brief, but I mean, the ethical framework, the opportunity for bias, the opportunity for existential is a word that's overused, but there is a threat that someone can sit at a laptop in an area and actually do extreme damage, whether that be bias, whether that be damage to a network, whether that be information, misinformation. The threats are very, very significant. So all the elements of the governance framework that we talked about earlier need to be in place. And I do, but also, and you heard that Lee's been involved with some of the sort of standard setting for the intelligent automation. They're being put in place for AI, but they're going to be even more important than they have been previously. And so I've touched on a couple of these, but you need to better understand and explain how this is all going to work. Bias management we talked about. The model, so there's a huge amount of data being used here. So you've got all sorts of issues around data privacy and use of data and intellectual property and workforce impacts. And I mean, so everything that was involved with RPA and other technology is in play, but more. A lot more because of and it actually is back to something Lee said earlier, generative AI. It's about new content, new information, something. It's not about machine learning, analyzing existing data and doing a prediction for forecasting. This is about producing something brand new. So all the governance issues become even more important than ever. So this is
Thank you, Phil. And
yeah.
I guess we want to make 2 points here, that governance has to be first installed and functional, and secondly, it needs a new agenda. So the items listed here are completely new. Understandability and explainability, if you're not familiar with those two, that's almost a separate webinar by itself. But it's a really big deal. And when a company gets dragged through the corporate media and the social media for some AI blunder, and they're trying to explain what went wrong and it falls flat, that's inside of this understandability and explainability. So we just wanted to give a flyover because there's a lot to dive into there. So innovation, we all, every big organization participates in innovation. Fantastic, great. Now, innovation, when you say AI, when you put AI in front of it, you're now talking about, as we mentioned, about 30 separate different technology clusters, each of which that have different uses. And each of which are fundamentally different from all of the technology that we use today. So getting the use of centers of excellence is a useful tool, and often can serve as a nucleus around which you can grow. But this actually gets all the way down to employees. Every single person that's using an AI solution is generating data and interacting with AI in a way that feeds the future and the evolution of those solutions. And this is just a very different reality. And it really means innovation becomes everybody's work.
Yeah, I mean, so, in previous technologies, we talked a lot about citizen development. You've heard that, and again, it brings its own opportunities and challenges, including governance again. But citizen development is without citizen development with AI, there is no AI, because you're actually doing it across the entire organization. So it's sort of citizen development on steroids we need to think about when we're talking about AI.
Yeah. Well, and Phil and I are old enough to remember the Six Sigma rollout in the 1990s, right? It was a really big deal. Statistical process control, whatever version you did. This had a lot of similarities here because it required a corporate-wide mandate. It required leadership at every level. It required employee participation at every level. So there was a lot of things. There were a lot of components that are similar to what we're seeing here in terms of its impact to the whole organization. So if you can think of how routine some of the statistical process controls are, whether that's Lean or Six Sigma or a whole host of other tools, you kind of get a sense of how it has permeated the organization. So when we talk to folks about innovation, they say, well, we're not very good at it. We don't have the infrastructure. Our data's a mess, and our culture just, isn't very good at innovation. Again, you can throw in the towel or go partner for it. Go rent infrastructure. You don't have to build it. Data, every enterprise's data is a mess. Join the party, right? So get started, hire a chief data officer, have your data valued, begin the process of cleansing and master data. Data. I was talking about data for AI literally 12 years ago. And its importance has only gone up since then. And then culturally, company-wide change initiatives are going to have to be the order of the day. So let's move on to future-proofing. Phil, when you talk to clients about how to think about being agile for the future, how does that change when you add AI?
Oh, well, I mean, it's basically around, you talked about COA, so it's structuring the organization to allow you to scale, as you talk about here. Future-proofing means that you are able to adopt. We were actually talking about this again yesterday when we talk about being AI capable. AI capable has a whole number of components to it. It's talent, it's organization, it's infrastructure, it's operating model. And that's what really we talk about future-proofing. How do we now allow us to understand and then implement and develop the use of and grow from AI? So that's what I would say. And also while we were doing that, I'm just looking at some of the questions that are coming through. And a lot of these are on operating model E, and some of the, how does it apply to HR operating model? How does it apply to the global transfer? What's the difference? How do you do AI transformation versus AI optimization? Some great questions in there. I would say that we're touching on some of the answers here. We're going to look through those questions and come back. But I would also add there is a white paper that we've written that Beth mentioned at the start that touches on some of that. And also the other questions I'm seeing is some on use cases. What are the use cases? And that's classic. So what are the use cases across the organization, which tends to be a little bit more specific, and that's fine as well. And again, I would point to the white paper where we actually do list a whole range of use cases across different functions. So yeah. I just wanted to take the opportunity to say that while we're still on. But really, future-proofing is I'm going to hand it back to you here because you're going to talk a little bit more.
Yeah, about it. I mean, it's really exciting. I was just glancing through the chat here. There's some fantastic questions coming up. So I do want to make sure we have time to address a couple of these. So again, I'm not going to drain this slide, but with future-proofing, you got to start someplace. Leverage an existing transformation. If somebody's putting in a new piece of technology, try to get inside that and say, okay, let's include these 4 things just to get us started in the dialogue of AI. If you can't get a revolution, get an evolution. But getting this stuff, these design criteria into your transformations is essential. And roadmaps, plans are subject to change. I love the statement, everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the face. Well, that's very real. And guess what? AI, you're going to get punched in the face a bunch. So being nimble and flexible is really the order of the day. And just understand that your competitors are in the same boat, right? This is not as though you don't have good company. And if you're not comfortable in observing what your competitors are doing and shamelessly taking those strategies if they're working, need to get over that. So I want to get into questions here. So the risk of real disruption is true, and I don't want to overstress it. We don't want to go too overboard with it. But if you wait 5 years, now we're in 2030. It might be too late. So building that capability and that muscle now really is essential. So now we'll go into some questions, and I see some that have been thumbed up. I don't know, Beth, if you have been synthesizing some of these for us.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just having a quick look at them, Lee, while we're talking. And I think, again, the comment I would say is there's some really tremendously relevant questions in here. We'll look through each of them and come back with a more considered response. But just to touch on a couple of them, one of them was about, one of the questions that I see there is, can you give us an example of where you've seen an AI transformation change delivered? That's a great question. The answer will be, no, but not yet. I mean, I think a lot of it's really organizations are looking at roadmaps and how to use AI and how to develop it and how to put it in the operating model that Lee was referring to. So has an AI transformation been delivered yet? Not really. There's loads of examples of intelligent automation and digital transformation. I think it's early stages, but I just say the principles of transformation apply to other technologies apply, but they're far more accentuated as dangerous opportunities, faster, I would say, as well. Second question on why I hope you've got a chance. Another question is, will the cost of AI be prohibitive? And I think the answer there is, well, it depends. I think it's interesting in some industries that are really leveraging, and there's a mention of startups in here. Actually, some of the startups are leveraging new technologies like AI, and they're actually going to undercut and undermine the big brands who've been around for a while. So no, I mean, the cost of technology is not prohibitive as long as you use it in the right way. The challenge is actually, to me, the cost of changing your way you do business are going to be potentially prohibitive if you're not willing to understand the consequences of that. The technology themselves are not that necessarily that costly, and the costs will come down as well over time, like they have done in past technology. So that's a couple of questions I've just quickly touched on. But,
let me dive a little more deeply on a couple of these. The question on AI-driven transformation, a couple of successful AI transformation changes. So let's talk about Rocket Mortgage. I mentioned that in the paper. Here's a case of where to get a mortgage is a 60-day typical thing, and Rocket Mortgage reimagined that to be 24 hours. Now, their actual success rate at 24 hours is meaningful, but usually it's more like 36 hours. But that is phenomenal. And what they did is completely disintermediate whole parts of the process leveraging AI. So with all of the publicly available information on your home, well, we don't have to do a title search the same way. We don't have to do a lien search the same way. We can actually find out what the value of your home is, from the bank's perspective, in an instantaneous way with data models. These are areas where AI has transformed in whole parts of an industry. If we look at Amazon's service, this is another example of where AI has successfully completely transformed things. When you are in a retail experience, the service experience is typically the most important thing. When Amazon started, I don't know if it's still true, but they declared a failure. It was an organizational failure. if it was ever required that a human customer talk to a human agent at Amazon. And if you remember back then, you had to dig 7 pages deep to find a customer service number. And that was by design on purpose, because they basically said, if our AI is not doing a good enough job, then we're going to declare a failure on that. And here's a case of where instead of being really good at service, the whole idea is no service is required. And we're starting to see that become more and more foundational.
Yeah, I would just quickly add, I know we're going to run out of time and Beth is going to jump in like 2 seconds, but a lot of the disruption change from technology has been going on for a long, long time. The examples that you gave are absolutely real. I think AI is, again, is there a specific example of an AI-driven transformational change? I think it's an extension of transformational changes that are already happening in many industries. What I'm looking forward to seeing is a fundamental AI, generative AI type of transformational change. I think that's going to be really interesting to watch. It's happening, but I think that's going to be interesting to watch how that happens in the next, 3 to 5 years.
And I want to hit the cost thing again, because I see several questions here with regard to the cost of AI. So I spent 2 days at a conference that was all about AI in the enterprise. And what we learned was that every business today, everybody that reported, this was on like 412 of the Fortune 500, came back and said that every AI project we have going on is self-funding. So interestingly, businesses are still expecting technology to, at minimum, be cost neutral and fund itself. Yes, doing a holistic operating model transformational change, and we'll talk about this in our next webinar when we talk about digital transformation. We'll talk about how we work AI in and kind of go in stealth-wise through a technology change and start beginning to teach the organization how to do AI. So this webinar was intended for those who are looking at operating model changes, for those who think that we might be able to get the attention of leadership and the board. These are difficult things to do. They are truly difficult things to do. I've been a part of a number of conversations, some of them with my very own executive teams, and they're very, very difficult things to do. So as we kind of unpack this going forward, we'll be looking for what are stealth ways as we do business process transformation, as we do digital transformation, as we use technology projects and process improvement projects and automation stuff. How do we insert the seeds of AI in and force the organization to organizationally respond to those things and become capable of sustaining them? We'll call it guerrilla AI transformation. In fact, I might change the title for the next 2 webinars to that. How are we doing on time? Do we have time for any more questions, Beth?
I don't like to be the bearer of bad news, but I do think that concludes the time slot we've got today for the webinar. But as Lee and Phil have already said, we will certainly get back and give more in-depth answers to any questions that weren't answered, because I can see everyone was so engaged with the session today with all the questions and comments we got. So I first of all want to say thank you, Phil and Lee. Brilliant session, really enjoyed listening to it. And for everyone watching, thank you for taking the time to join us today. And if you would, in the time being, like to find any more answers to your questions, as again, Phil and Lee have mentioned, I would urge you to have a check out the report or the next webinar in the series. But that is all we have time for today. So thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. I enjoyed it.
Thanks, everyone.
Talking with some of you further. Appreciate it.